Well, good morning, and I'm Todd Issacson, and I work in the CIO G6, and it's a real honor to be here today. And I have an opportunity to serve both as a panel chair and moderator. And so what that means is any hard questions, I will put on the hat of moderator and push toward my distinguished teammates on the table and the panel. As always, I've heard General Fogarty and General Nakasone speak numerous times over the years, and it is always a very difficult act to follow. So calling on the bullpen will be your leadoff hitter this morning. And we'd like to talk about harnessing data as a strategic asset. As you look at what both General Fogarty and General Nakasone described this morning, it is obvious that in order to fulfill the vision of what multi-domain operations portends for your Army, it is a data-centric environment. What I'd like to do is briefly describe a few things temporally about MDO as it relates to data. And then what we'll do is I'll ask each of our teammates to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a few comments from each of our panelists. And then we'll open up for questions that we hopefully establish a dialogue with all of our partners that are here this morning. With that as our road ahead for the morning, let me begin briefly by describing, and General Nakasone hit on this, is the synergy we seek to integrate 5 warfighting domains is an enormous challenge. But that's the idea behind multi-domain operations. And the idea that any sensor can be triggered by any target that then goes to potentially any platform and cleared to fire by any headquarters element in near real time is the vision temporally of what MDO could be. And when you look at the demands and the interconnectivity that is unprecedentedly required to do that, the underpinning of all of that is trusted and accessible data in real time. I think there are 2 dimensions that I'd mention as it relates to data in this capacity. One is the human dimension. The ability that General Nakasone described also is the ability for decisions to be made quickly and to be able to make them faster than your adversary. That is a keystone of fulfilling the vision of multi-domain operations against a near peer that is extremely capable. So the human dimension. The other one is the technical dimension. In order to facilitate the machine learning and the artificial intelligence capabilities, data that is structured, accessible, and available and trusted is the fuel by which AI and machine learning will occur. And the complement of both those human dimensions and the technical dimensions, I think, are absolutely essential as we move forward. When you characterize MDO, the pace of operations, its lethality, the complexity of integrating all of those warfighting domains, I think data obviously plays an essential part, particularly at the tactical edge. The last thing I'll describe is the protection of that data is essential. And it begins from the moment it is created to the time that it is disposed. So the protection, the notion of protecting data and making it trusted carries through the life cycle of that data. So with that as kind of a pre-context, I would like to ask each of our teammates in order to introduce themselves and give some initial opening remarks. And then, like I said, we'll leave as much time as we can possibly keep so that we can establish a dialogue and take some great conversation. So I'll ask Vince to begin with his introduction. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Vince Bonsage. I work at Army Cyber Command. I am in the Technical Warfare Center, TWC. And what I do is I lead a team of analysts and data scientists to bring together data to help our commander make decisions. And we do that, the primary tool we do that with is the Army's Big Data Platform, our BDP, which is Gabriel Nimbus. Some of the key things that I'm going to talk about this morning or make sure we hit on are data standards, the ability to what we've been able to do over the last 3 years is standardize the way that we bring in data, regardless of its native form, its raw format, to a place that allows our use of that data, regardless if it's an application, an analytic, or a human, to get to that data very quickly. The second thing I want to talk about is how that standardization has allowed us to have or achieve interoperability, not only within the command, but also with U.S. Cyber Command, with the Air Force, and other entities out there that are leveraging those standards that I talked about. And the last thing is security. As Major General Issacson pointed out, bringing that data into one place so that regardless of the authorities that you hold, the security clearance that you have, the job title, and where you work, you have access to that data based on your job role. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks. Leo Garciga, I'm the Intelligence Community CIO for the Army. So we had a long chat before we came on board here to kind of think about what we're going to talk about. But I want to jump on the data protection piece pretty heavy today. I think we start looking moving forward at the types of technologies that are out there. Lots of small companies emerging with some what I consider true data protection technologies, right down at the software level, that are very specific. In this environment where it's a nation state on nation state environment, this idea that we're going to be able to build these castle walls everywhere is just not real. So it starts becoming, living in this zero trust model and changing the way we think about data protection. I will tell you that I think over the last, say, 5 years, we've seen a lot of stuff come out from both NSA and from a lot of small businesses tied to especially finance and medical that we're probably not leveraging effectively right now in the DoD space. So I look at our industry partners today, which is why we have industry partners sitting right here, and start thinking about what that looks like in DoD, because that is a huge paradigm shift operating in that environment. This environment where we're not building a castle wall and some moats, but where we're saying, hey, that's okay. We're going to wrap this very strategically important piece, which is our individual pieces of data, and protect that from birth to death. So we've seen a lot of that change already happen in the IC. So how do we start moving that across the entire DoD spectrum? The other piece to that is, and Gabriel Nimbus is a great example. So the Army comes out, we push out BDP, we start looking at the cyber threat, but it's really how do you take that next step to operationalize it? When we start talking about MDO and the deep fight, we're going to ask cyber analysts, we're going to ask intel analysts, and we're going to ask functionals, operators, to answer questions in fundamentally different ways, right? What we've been used to for 10 years, hey, we'll get this SIGINT thing, and hey, we'll get this open source, and boom, we got a target. That's not the world we're living in now. Now it's really about using new types of data, whether that be commercial data, data that's coming from sensors that we're unused to using, and even some what I would consider some old school data, right? All of a sudden we care about MASINT. We kind of forgot about that for the last decade. So really it starts becoming how do we take these new data sets and find new ways to answer these questions. And again, that's all about the problem we're trying to solve, and that problem is changing very quickly. That being said, I will tell you that our industry partners are going to be our biggest friends in this space, right? Whether we're talking data science for logistics data, data science for intel analysis, or for financial threat analysis, or cyber threat analysis. These folks have been doing it a long, long time. And yep, it looks a little different, smells a little different, but definitely there are corollaries and we really need their help. So that being said, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thanks. So my name is Mike Colson. I'm the Solutions Architect Manager for Army and Air Force at AWS. I've been with AWS for 3 years. Before that, 20 years doing DoD IT ops. So been around, understand a lot of the problems that are being faced. I'm going to get across today, hopefully, that data has gravity. We look at data and think, oh, it's these unique object sets or columnar databases, but really what it is it's weighted. If you think about how we got to the elemental table, we were weighing how many electrons were within the element itself, how many atoms, how it was made up. Data is the same way. As we bring in these different data sets, we're going to create new weights within our data categories. And data is then going to pull in additional data. It's going to pull in additional APIs and standardizations. So as we're looking at the way that the Army needs to approach this data, we need to be cognizant of the fact that this data is going to have its own growth potential, its own gravitational field, as it were. The second is training. So that human piece, really the thing that I've been preaching for 20-some years now is that the DoD has a captured workforce in that you all signed up. This is a volunteer Army. So you have the folks there. You just have to train them so that they're better prepared to do the job both in uniform and out. And that opportunity is there. We as an industry have developed training that is available to you, and there's ways that we can implement that through new MSOs, et cetera. And the last is security, which isn't really last, it probably should be first, but understanding that this is about the data. It's about how we secure the data. The way that we've viewed security in the past within DoD has been that moat, castle wall, citadel defense strategy. And while building defense in depth makes sense in some instances, what are you trying to protect? Traditionally, it was you're trying to protect the server. Well, the compute function doesn't matter, right? We don't care. We're going to start treating the compute as though it were livestock. If the server messes up, we kill it and move on. We care about the data, if they're getting access to the data. So we need to obfuscate, we need to encrypt, we need to protect. Those are the things that we want to get across today, and hopefully we can do that successfully. Joel.
Thank you, Mike. Hey, everybody. I'm Joel Minton, Technical Director of the Office of the CTO at Google Cloud. Prior to Google, I was at the White House building login.gov, which is a single sign-in platform that's used by agencies across the civilian space, a little bit in DoD as well. The couple points I want to make here is, number one, data is a culture. It's not just something that you say, we're going to do data and it just happens. This is something where your whole organization needs to change the way you think about data. You need to think about from the executives at the top of your organization all the way down to the individual contributors at the bottom. They all need to be saying, how are we making decisions and how are we using data to drive those decisions? So the ability for everybody to be on the same page and making fact-based decisions versus gut feel is extremely important. And so when I think about technology, I think about the people, the process, and the technology, because my experience in government says that technology usually isn't the problem. Tech is usually the easy part. It's usually the people in the process that has the problem. So that overall data culture, that overall thinking about how you operationalize the data is a huge thing that all of you should be thinking about. The other key point I wanted to make is around all your data in one place. So when you think about all of these disparate data systems that you have today, if those data systems are all standalone data systems and you don't have the ability to connect the data elements together, you're going to have a really hard time when your data scientists want to build a model. They're going to have 50% of the data they need. And if they have to do a bunch of data wrangling in order to pull that data together, they're going to make really slow decisions. So having all of the data in one place, what I said earlier about that, the Army and other parts of DoD bringing all their data together is going to be a key part of the success that you'll have moving forward.
Well, thanks. And so what I'm going to ask is for Mr. Garciga to actually begin his context first. And we'll go down the line. I want to finish with Vince, and there's a reason for that because of the security components and the three atoms that Vince is going to cover at the end as kind of a wrapper, I think, of all of the comments that will be covered. So, Leo, if you could lead us off. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So I like what Joel just said. I see it the same way. I always tell everyone, don't talk to me about technology. I don't want to hear about it. I got that figured out. It's actually pretty easy for the most part. There are some challenges out there, right? Fundamental problems in computer science, got that. Almost always it's people and process. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that because I think when we start looking at how do you operationalize, right, whether it be big data platform or some other capability to answer these tough questions. And the big thing is right, captured audience, right? It is a luxury that we have in DoD and in the services, and maybe we're not prosecuting that the right way, right? And what I mean by that is there is a lot of talent in the formation right now. We all get stovepiped into, I'm an intel guy, I'm a cyber guy, and kind of let's work our problems around there. That's not really real in the world we live in today. If you look at the commercial space right now, what you're seeing, I think the guys from Uber told me it's something like 2,500 people in their data science environment, right? Out of those 2,500 people, they only actually have about 150 data scientists. So who's everybody else? Well, everybody else is functionals, right? It's their business folks who are operating in that data science environment. It's their NetOps folks. It's not a bunch of data scientists that are sitting on there, right? They've really built out that ecosystem to democratize that data across their workforce and leverage it to make decisions. So the reason I say that is, let's look at MDO. Now we're talking about a deep fight, taking sensor data, right, from very, very far away, and trying to make sense of that with what we got at our fingertips. It's a fundamentally different way of approaching data on the battlefield today. And then smash that up with cyber data on top of that, right? Those are not questions we've been asking historically, and now we got to kind of change our mindset to ask those questions. So the people piece is probably the most critical piece that I see in this space, right? And the training options are out there for sure, right? I know both companies that are sitting here have great options in that space. I think it's bigger than that, right? I think it's a commitment to actually go out there and kind of give folks across the space, whether it be somebody sitting in the acquisition world or somebody sitting in the cyber world, right? Those basic tools and the data sets to go and ask these questions. So that's a big piece to me as we look at the problem is really that training piece and really getting the data out there and letting folks move out and giving some space, right? I think when you look at a lot of what's happening, finance space is one I find pretty interesting, where you have folks who historically, yeah, great, we're great at spreadsheets, and all of a sudden you teach them how to code in 2 languages, and they're basically better than most of the folks coming out of MIT or Stanford with PhDs, right? Because guess what? They're the ones who really understand the problem. So that focus shift to get functionals to really give them that ecosystem to go and not necessarily play, but learn how to answer these questions on their own, because that is our greatest asset. The other piece to that is that flexibility across the workforce, right? I hear it all the time in DoD, well, we can't do cloud, and we can't do DevSecOps, and we can't do this data science stuff. We don't have the skill set. I would say I fundamentally disagree with that. I think the skill set is in the formation. Now, have we built the mechanisms to bring those folks into the game to solve these problems? Maybe not as effectively as we should have. Have we let this ecosystem out there to let folks come in and show what they can do? Probably not as effectively as we should have. So I think that's a piece where we look to definitely to industry and academia to kind of give us some lift, right? Help us get there, because that is a tough challenge. We're asking folks to fundamentally change the way we do business, whether that be all of a sudden, hey, we're going to let folks who aren't 8570 compliant get on a network and code. That's kind of scary when you think about it. The other piece to that, and there is a technology piece on the ecosystem side, which really boils down to modernizing our enterprise. And as we move away from this kind of castle wall and moat analogy, now it starts becoming of actually looking at risk and looking at code. All of a sudden, we have to actually interrogate our code. So this idea of, oh, there's no Cat 1s, that's good. Yeah, okay, great. I'm with you, right? That's cattle. I'm not even worried about that, right? If we have problems there, we got bigger problems to begin with. It's everything else on top. And as we look at cloud, all of a sudden, we don't even look at these issues anymore. Now we're talking about what code was written, what code is out there, how safe is that code? So this idea of shifting our paradigm to focusing on that, to really focusing on that data protect is pretty critical. Any comments?
So we appreciate those as context. And what I'd like to do for the gentleman on the end to just continue the conversation and then we'll bring it back to Vince. And I do have, frankly, several great conversations that will dovetail precisely on this notion that Leo just described. So please continue.
Yeah, so go first. Yeah, okay. So just to kind of go back to a couple of things that were mentioned. First, so I get on a little bit of a soapbox when we talk about the difference between security and compliance, because we tend to conflate the two, and they're completely separate things. The reality is the scare of someone who's not 8570 compliant is well, I mean, we laugh at it, right? Because I mean, 8570 is essentially like the lowest bar that you can imagine for an IT professional. So it's just funny to me because it doesn't even include the platforms that you're actually currently building on, nor any of the legacy platforms that you already built on. It's talking about platforms that are, you know, pie in the sky. Maybe you once did something with a Windows environment, but now you have to be a Windows sysadmin certified individual, but you're working on, I don't know, CloudFormation or something like crazy, right? You're not doing anything that has to do with that. So it's just an odd standard that we continue to use these standards because we're comfortable with them, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're bringing us any real security or compliance. I mean, Security Plus talks about Faraday cages. How many of you have Faraday cages in your data centers? I've worked in a lot of data centers in the DoD. I've never seen one, and that includes environments that had cipher locks on the doors. When you're talking about like that field training, so we've worked with the academies like West Point and Air Force Academy, Citadel, and others. We have programs that are implemented there, right, to allow for these folks that are coming into the ranks to get trained on both data science and on how cloud operations work. And yes, we even talk about DevOps, because who doesn't love a good buzzword? But the reality is we're giving them that skill set early so that as they come in, they're not frightened by it. They're not looking at it as though it's some new crazy paradigm shift. But folks who are already in look at this and say, oh yeah, we get this, right? I mean, by and large, we don't go into meetings and sit down and say, hey, what is your CI/CD pipeline plan, and get like big bug eyes like, what are you talking about? Folks understand continuous integration, continuous deployment. They understand that process. I think there's a lot of really sharp folks within the Army space that get what we're trying to talk through when we're coming in with cloud. They just don't necessarily have the tools to do it on premises. So they're missing that automation piece, which is really key if we're talking about security at all, is to get to a point where we get the people out of the loop. I call it the Bob factor. There's always a Bob. Your security can be airtight, but you bring one Bob into the room who is just fool enough to try whatever he wants, and you're going to end up with a security gap. And that's how traditionally we've been popped. It's been somebody who brings in a vulnerable laptop, a vulnerable desktop, turns on or off a server at night because they don't feel like having it patched or scanned, and that's the vulnerability. So we can't Bob-proof everything, but if we lock down that data and we do security in the right way, and we think about compliance as just the checkbox regime that gets us to a lowest class validation point that we can then apply security on top of, I think we have a path forward. And that's true of data too, right? We just have to look at the lowest common denominator to get to a compliance level, but the highest possible granularity in order to lock down that data at that object level versus locking it down at larger blob or block levels.
I just want to add one thing. To be real specific, what does this mean? So General Barrett's here from NetCom. So this is critical, what was just said. This fundamentally changes our workforce, right? We're talking about doing infrastructure as code. So your network folks, they look different. They look very, very different, right? Your system admins, they look extremely different. All of a sudden, we're having conversations about standing up a Yum enterprise server, right? As opposed to, hey, we've got all this Windows stuff figured out. Well, to do all these other things, right? It's a lot of brand new technology to sit on the enterprise, but I think the big thing around that is automate. Because I'm with you. I've never walked into a room and said, "Let me see your CI/CD pipeline." It's kind of like, well, yeah, if you're developing software, that's what you're doing, right? You've already got one. So I think it's getting everybody to that mindset and building that foundational piece around it.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple things related to people. My time in government, I was in government for 2.5 years, and when I first got there, I was just flabbergasted by the amount of talent in government. There is talent everywhere. But generally, the issue in government is that there's a lot of people telling them what they can't do. There's a lot of people saying, in order to be compliant, you have to do this, 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 and this, which means that they cannot write code to automate things. They cannot use the latest tools. So I think in general, us as leaders, we need to be very cognizant that the people are out there. We might need to train them a little bit. We might need to give them access to some newer tools, but the people are there. We just need to make sure that we give them access. To add on to the point about data and people having access to data, giving access to all your analysts, all your people who are managing the tools, all the people managing the products. The more people that have access to data, obviously with the right permissions and the right security, but the more people that have access to data, the better decisions are going to be made. So when you're thinking about how do you generate a workforce that makes really solid decisions and really fast decisions, the more data that you can put in the hands of your entire organization, not just the analysts, but the people actually doing the work and working on the mission, the better you're gonna be in the long term.
So, but I think we agree on this. What we're not saying is, we're not saying just raw data access. Yeah. We're saying provide that data access through standardized APIs and applications, right? That's the end point of this is you want to standardize that data set. So you create your data lake environment and then you provide access into it. It's not, when we're saying this, some people who don't understand this data realm think, oh, we're going to provide everyone access to data, and then you're like, oh, I'm in all of these Word docs. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about providing a standardization methodology for how we provide access in, and then granular level access within that data set.
Yeah, and the things that I think about when I think about what data to give people access to, generally when I lead an organization, I like that organization to be run based on metrics. So what are the KPIs? What are the key metrics that those people are accountable for? And making sure that they have access to those metrics on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, right? If they're doing a mission that requires them to optimize a certain thing and they don't have access to the actual data to know how they're doing, are they getting better, are they getting worse, that's where you end up in a bad place. So I think the more that you can give people access to the tools that allow them to understand how they're accomplishing the mission, the better off you're going to be.
Todd, just a comment, because I think the conversation actually started about people. And so I think most of you are aware that we got the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army now, and that so absolutely readiness, modernization, reform, and assuring our allies are going to be priorities for the Army. But the number one priority for the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army, because again, this conversation actually started out about people, and it started out about talent. Rest assured, and I wanted to make sure everybody knows that his number one priority is going to be people. And it's for all the reasons that you just heard here in the last 10 or 15 minutes. And so we've been going back and forth for the last 10 or 15 years with this conversation about, well, in the government, absolutely, we got really, really good people, but we can't compete with industry. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about getting a dialogue going, a competition to compete with industry, meaning we're going to be able to pay them the same thing that industry pays them. Most of you in the audience already know the answer to that question. The generation of people and the pool of people that we're talking about recruiting to come work for the government, they are not motivated by only the mighty dollar. The one thing that they want, they were talking about things they're going to give them access to, et cetera, they want meaningful work, all right? Surveys after survey after survey, market research all over the place says that the vast majority of the pool of people that we're looking to recruit, they want to hold 3 jobs in the first 5 years of their career, and they're very, very comfortable doing that. So our task in the context of this discussion, and I'll get my opportunity to talk later, and I promise not to put anybody to sleep. Maybe I'll wake some people up during my time here, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to make sure that we get the message across that we are going to kind of re-energize a dialogue and a focus in the Army on people, and the reason we're going to do that is because of what they're talking about now. But it's not just, let's not fall into the traps of the past where it becomes a discussion just about our ability to compete with industry. We don't want that. We want to partner with industry. But our culture change, especially for my generation, has got to be this big idea, acknowledging it. And Steve Fogarty, my Ranger buddy, and I talk about this all the time. They're not motivated by the things of the past. Absolutely, money's important. It's always going to be important. But what they want is meaningful work. So how do we, as an institution, create an environment where we can take the people my age that we still have that are going to be around a while and refocus a lot of their effort, because we're really sure that about 40%, only about 40% of the skill sets I have today are going to be relevant in the next 3 to 5 years. And we've done the research on that. And so we can have a conversation about that. But in the context of pulling together this next generation of leaders and talent that we're going to need, how do we create the environment where they want to come work for us because they're going to get an opportunity to break things? Because we can create an opportunity for them to get meaningful work. That's the big culture shift that's going to have to happen. Back to the 40th Chief of Staff of the Army's big idea that winning matters. And a part of winning is taking better care of our people, ... creating better opportunities to recruit, to train the very best and maintain them on the Army team. I just thought this might be an opportunity to interject because we're talking about people. But there's a human dimension to this talking about people that is not necessarily focused on just the technical skill sets. Because the young people that we're talking about recruiting, they are motivated and incentivized by different things. And so any thoughts that you all have on that throughout the day, we're all ears. All right, thank you.
Sir, thank you. I'm going to ask Vince to cover a few things, and then I've got some good questions teed up. Thank you.
So I'm just going to go back to the key points I opened on, the first one being the standards associated with our data. So 3+ years ago when we first stood up a BDP for our cyber, right, we and arguably still today in some regards, we didn't have a way to standardize the way that we brought in our data, the ETL process, right? Bringing that data in and normalizing it in a way so that anybody that has a use case for that data can use it. We had disparate data sources that were essentially given the autonomy to standardize on their own. And what that ended up with is when the echoic or when the commander wants to make a decision, it takes a very long time to bring that data to bear to make that decision. Fast forward to today, what we've been able to do is by bringing that data in to a standard, and our standard is the DISA managed BDP, we've been able to move a lot quicker. Now, we don't have all our data there, but we do have a mature platform that is 275 virtual nodes in AWS GovCloud. We have over 500 feeds that we bring in. We're sitting at about 7 petabytes of data. And we built it primarily on defensive cyber operations and the use cases associated with that. So I say all that because while normalizing the data and having standards to interact with that data is important, it's equally as important for the applications and the use of that data and the analytics that you want to build on top of that. 3+ years ago, before we brought up BDP, all those entities, all those disparate infrastructure owners were going out and buying applications or building applications with their folks in a vacuum, right? They're going and arguably buying the same tool on multiple different in places in the globe, or they're buying the different tools that arguably do the same thing, right? 5 different tools that look at vulnerabilities. Bringing that data into one place and allowing us to standardize that has really, we've made our money in that regard because now we're building one tool to look at vulnerabilities. And we're not having to go out and spend that money 5 different times. But more importantly, if you're a user in one of the RCCs and you move to another RCC or you move to the headquarters, you're using the same exact system. And you're not having to spend time training and learning different tools and applications. So that's critical. The second piece for me is while we've been able to do this over the last 3 years and we have the maturest BDP in the community, the key word there is community, right? So we've been able to have or achieve interoperability as a result of the community at large using that same standard that I spoke about. So there are many like it, but Gabriel Nimbus is mine, right? So there are many BDPs. U.S. Cyber Command has a BDP. The Air Force is using BDP. The Department of Energy uses BDP. The Federal Reserve is using BDP for cyber. So within the cyber community, because of the scale of our data and the nature of it, it simply made sense and to standardize to something, right? So, and you're able to see a lot of interoperability with respect to that. And what I mean by that, in simple terms, is when I go on to Gabriel Nimbus and I log in and I look for an IP range, for example, or a domain, I can get results not only from our lake, but I can get results from U.S. Cyber Command's lake. I can get results from those other BDPs through distributed query. And what we would not have that, right, without some level of standardization across our data. If our systems, if our platforms had to go out and understand how Apache Cassandra or MongoDB does things, and we're using Apache Accumulo, if you're trying to go ahead and query in a very quick way using different types of databases, SQL, non-SQL, you're never going to get there, right? So that has really enabled us not only on the NIPR fabric, but also those entities that I talked about, including us. We've stood up a SIPR platform, a SIPR BDP, and by the end of the year, our aim is to build a JWIX platform as well. So the last thing I want to talk about is security. The security of the data, you've heard it multiple times here this morning, but we leverage something, we leverage a database called Apache Accumulo. And a lot of times we say we have a data lake, but really what we have is a data jail, right? And in our jail, right, there's a lot of cell blocks or blobs, and then within those cell blocks, there's individual cells. And every time we bring in new data, we put it in jail. And as a user of the data, I have to have certain keys to open up that door, right? And you and I may not have the same keys. So what that does is it allows us to bring multiple users with different authorities. When we bring on a user, we look at their clearance, we look at their job role, and we establish authorities so that when we bring in raw data and we store it in Accumulo, it recognizes those authorities. And it allows both the human interaction and those applications and analytics that interact with that data to always have that seamless security of the data down to the cellular level. And that's extremely important for us and for the other entities that I spoke about in the cyber community. And arguably, it's going to be important as the Army continues to move to the cloud. And that's really important. So if we see what's happening today, a lot of entities are moving to the cloud, but we're not doing it in a standard way. And so while I spoke about that disparate ETL process that's on-prem, we're forklifting some of that into the cloud today. And so we need to get our arms around that as an Army and figure out how do we standardize without being too restrictive, but allowing our commanders, regardless of what warfighting or mission area or business mission area that they're in, to be able to see that data very quickly and make decisions on that. So I'll leave it at that.
And I would add one thing to that. So for our industry partners, so this is a big piece of where we need your help, right? When RFPs go out on the street, right? I got it what it's looked like for the last 2 decades, right? But you should be pitching out systems that have open APIs that are ready to share, that can integrate with security technology out there to secure the data at rest. And those are the things we're looking for. We cannot do this alone in the government. We really need that help on the industry side as you come in to really kind of let us know what the art of the possible is. Because I think a lot of folks up here have been doing this for a while, and those of us who've been in the big data space and in the data science space, we feel very comfortable talking about this, but that's not reflective of the entire force. And at times, that's not reflective of our acquisition personnel who are making these acquisitions. So we really do need your help in this space. I'm going to jump on the cloud thing because it's really important what I just heard here. And this gets back to kind of we look at the technologies and trying not to take the bad habits of the past on-prem and moving them to the cloud, because that actually solves no problems, right? That actually makes it worse. I see a bunch of people in the industry laughing, right? So for those of us who've lived this in the past and lived this on the industry side, it's the worst thing you can do. But that's part of this too, right? It's that back and forth conversation as we look at the systems that we have, right? And for the integrators out there coming to the government and saying, hey, if you want to move to the cloud, here's what it means, right? And sometimes it means a contract change, and that's okay. And sometimes it means a system redesign, and that's okay too. But what we want to do is get your help to make sure that we're not kind of forklifting our bad habits. A lot of folks already learned this lesson. I personally don't want to learn it again or watch anybody else do it. And see, they're laughing because they know what I'm talking about. So we'd ask for your help in that space for sure.
So I just would caveat and say, please, from the industry perspective, come up with your metadata and tagging strategies and standardize on them, because that's where, I mean, I'm actively working at least 6 data lake programs within the Army right now, and there's not a standardization on data tagging and metadata, and without having standards, it's really hard to then get to this utopic world of all the data's there, we're in one place, you know, we're working across fabrics, we're at the unclass, class, and TS level, but no one has the same standard on tagging, so then we're having to re-rationalize data if we want to pull it together. So as we come together, start working towards a standard.
I think it's critical. A lot of times I say bring it all to one place, but it doesn't have to be to one place, right? Because everyone, or people get nervous when you say, oh, you're going to bring all that data to one lake. Well, no. We can bring data to multiple virtual cloud instantiations, but because we're all operating on the same standard, that allows you to essentially, as a user of that data, interact with that data like it's in one lake or one jail. So.
Yeah, can I say something right at this point? So we absolutely recognize this. The CIO just published the data strategy with the data operating standard. So we're moving very rapidly to address this issue. We absolutely recognize it, and the G3 is actually leading the Army staff as we speak on what that solution is going to be. So we are going to mandate, we are going to prescribe, and we think if we get the data operating standard straight, then frankly we don't care which cloud service provider you're going to go to, right? So you can optimize, whether it's AWS, Azure, whatever for your particular business need. But the bottom line is the data will be standardized. So we're moving very, very rapidly in that direction right now. So part of this was the time we spent with a couple of you guys over the last couple of months, and then Vince has given us a path forward. But this is where, again, my Ranger buddy and I came together because we had pieces and parts of this thing, and then we partnered with the Army G3 to pull this together.
Sir, thanks for those comments. Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, the only other point I was going to make is when you think about where you put that data and what kind of format you put that data in, think about how it's going to be accessed, right? So a lot of times, people can throw things into a big Hadoop cluster and be like, it's the best thing ever because everything's in one place, but nobody can query it and nobody can get the data out because it's kind of in a different kind of jail. So when you think about data and where you're going to put it, think about who are the users who are going to access it, right? If you can use a standard data warehouse technology that people can use SQL, they can use APIs, they can use other mechanisms to get to the data, that allows that data to be used and actually generate a lot more insights like I was talking about earlier, where you can optimize people's missions. So just make sure you think about how you're going to access it before you decide on what that standard way is that you're going to write it.
And don't be inflexible, right? Because the tools of today are not going to be the tools of tomorrow. So when you're looking for those open standards, don't just plan for, oh, well, this is how it worked 5 years ago, and so we're going to keep it. Even if it was in a cloud 5 years ago, guess what? Those technologies have rapidly evolved. So you always have to be looking at how to move it forward.
So one of the questions that we've taken that I'd like to weave into our conversation is about this opportunity and of identifying policy challenges. So, Leo, you've described data lake, venture talking data jail, whatever we're going to call it moving forward, and I say that tongue-in-cheek. The idea, I'm confident in your experiences, we've identified either policy barriers or things that must be addressed up front so as to meet the art of the possibility. I'd like to ask everybody to address anything experiment that you've experienced regarding policy. Thank you.
Are you sure? I don't know that anyone really likes me to talk about this, but I'll do it anyway. Okay, so this is a problem that was created by the DoD, and it's a DoD-centric problem. The way I tell this story is in a biblical sense, because it really feels like it's that epic. So in the beginning, there was FedRAMP, and it was good, and we were all happy. Cloud providers, there were hundreds of cloud providers, and we were all like, yeah, we're in. We'll do all of these NIST 800-53 standards. And then a couple years in, some folks said, you know what, we have an additional set of controls. We need FedRAMP Plus. It's like another 57 controls. Are you guys good with that? Yeah, cool. We got it. So FedRAMP Plus went through. We lowered it from a couple hundred to around 75 cloud service providers, went through that process. And then the DoD said, you know, we see this and we were part of it and we have folks on the jab, but we're not really comfortable with just doing what everybody else does. So we're going to use the exact same control set, but call it something else and have another jab to go through. And we're going to call it, I don't know, impact levels. That sounds right. And we're going to have impact levels 1 through 6, and then that's too complex. So rather than renumber, we're going to go 2, 4, 5, and 6 because that made sense. And we've gone through this multiple time process where now we have to send and submit every service and subservice individually through FedRAMP jab and DoD CCSRG jab, separate jab boards, right? Guess what? The people who sit on the FedRAMP jab are the exact same people who sit on the DoD CCSRG jab. They just change hats and revote and resubmit a package, and cloud service providers like us pay between $250,000 and $500,000 a service to go through this process twice because the DoD decided they wanted a new paradigm. Now, if there was actually a whole set of subservices to this that needed to be met, I would agree, right? The controls are necessary, but NIST 800-53 is a standard subset of controls. There's a shared service model on every cloud service provider on how you apply controls to your environment. That shared security model basically says we control the security of the cloud, gates, guns, and guards up to the hypervisor, a little bit higher on shared services. For everything above that, you as the customer have to come in and make sure that you're applying proper controls and standards, including encryption, ensuring that you're using encrypted tunnels, ensuring that you're using secure devices, patching your environment. All of that's still on customers to do within the environment. So if you want to know what policy I think is wrong, it's that we're using policy as a shield rather than as a way to protect ourselves, right? We're shielding ourselves from technology versus embracing technology and securing it. I'm sorry.
Oh, so spot on. So I'll just touch on the cloud piece because that's just one of many policy challenges. Yeah, you're right. So I'll give you the next part of that DoD piece, as I call our made-up, self-inflicted wound policies, right? So, and I'll give you the example that I'm very familiar with. So C2S is out there, and my first day on the job, I get my folks, and they tell me, we're going to accredit all these services. And I said, didn't somebody already do that? So what are we doing exactly? We're going to redo work that really smart people already did? Yeah, that's never going to happen. So here you go. It's done, right? These guys know what they're doing. The agency said no, they know what they're doing. I'm not going to go redo a bunch of work, right? So as I start walking, going around DOD, what do I hear? Well, we're redoing that. Well, what are you redoing exactly? Are you smarter than those guys all of a sudden? Did that just magically happen? So we're going to spend that money, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100? How many apps do we have in the Army? 800 times, right? Is that real? That's not real at all. So some of this is kind of thinking through the problem and saying, hey, at least at the provider level, we're going to give some reciprocity, right? And then at the enterprise level, we're going to deliver that to our customers too. right? We're not going to have this kind of archaic approach where if you're going to go to cloud or you're going to do it on-prem, you're going to do everything from the top of the stack to the bottom of the stack. That's not real. That's not affordable, right? We'll never get to where we need to be doing it that way. And again, that's a very compliance-heavy thing and kind of makes me sick a little bit because that's not where the focus is, right? That's not risk assessment. That's just shelfware that we probably will never look at again. I know that's not popular to say, but it's real, right? I've been an AO for 10 years, and I will tell you when stuff it's done, right? I probably will never look at that again, and I just focus on risk and what the risk is to my network. But there are other policy pieces that are missing right now, and I will say, in fact, we're working this with our cyber pretty diligently, is building out that next generation of policy that does allow us to take that tiered approach to cloud accreditation, right? So Gabriel Nimbus coming onto a high-side network, they should never have to worry about foundational service, right? Don't worry about that, right? They almost shouldn't even have to worry about platform because they're deploying on a common platform. They should just worry about analytics. Build analytics and build tools. All this other stuff, we got you. We'll take care of it. But building out that policy is definitely something that we've done on the high side, right? Partly to enable the Gabriel Nimbus folks and partly to enable some of our other customers. And the other piece to that is this is a shocking idea, but there's a big data platform that's an accredited framework. How about just let them build at speed and scale, right? It's accredited, it's secure, but putting out that policy that allows you to do that is a fundamentally different way of doing business in DoD. And it's scary, right? All of a sudden we go from looking at endpoints to people like me saying, hey, that's great, don't care. Give me the telemetry off your data stack so I can actually look at that, and give me the telemetry off your Git instance so I can actually see if your code is secure or whether there's a third-party library there that's about to eat me that was written by some Russian dude 20 years ago, who, by the way, is an FSP guy, right? So those are the things that we need to worry about. And making that shift, right, whether it be from an enterprise perspective or even from a policy perspective, is going to take a little bit of time, but there's a bunch of pathfinders out there right now, and we're working a couple on the Intel side that are very much focused on what are those next generation of policies that we're going to have to push out there to give folks that really broad left and right limit so they can move at speed and scale.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is it's not all doom and gloom. I would say because of all these cloud services now, like you have the ability to adopt a lot of these cloud services to get a lot of that work done for you, so you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel every time. So hopefully, as the compliance regime comes along the journey, we'll be able to say, okay, all of these cloud services, which greatly enhance your security, are approved, and everybody can use them right out of the gate, so you don't have to reauthorize them one after another.
And I'll just say, based on this convoluted policy that we've been talking about, it really has forced us to standardize. And the standardization that we have is not necessarily because someone actually took the time to peel back the development guide and read it from beginning to end. It was the fact that because I could get reciprocity with an ATO, I could, when U.S. Cyber Command needed a big data platform, we could stand it up in 2 weeks versus 2 years. And so what that enabled is it essentially made standardization as a result. And so when we expand that kind of concept to the major CSPs that are out there, I think that'll only advance the standardization. So, and the key thing there is that every time with that standard platform, we've been able to we're able to bring either old applications or build new applications within our security layer, and you don't need to do any type of adjustment to your ATO as a result of that. So we've built over 50 DCO applications and analytics on the platform, and we've not once messed with our ATO. And that's huge, and I can share them with the entities that have that.
I apologize that the panel members don't have any passion about what we're talking about up here, so I appreciate it very much. Here's a great question regarding so when we're talking about data, how it is generated. So we're talking a lot about process and people-generated data, but can you address how to manage and organize modeling simulation data as well as machine learning data that is a result of consuming the data in the first place?
I mean, when you're thinking about data sets coming in, the ones generated by humans are going to be very small. They're going to be high labor because you have to manually do those at times. But from a machine perspective, as that data is being generated, you need to be able to ingest all of that data in real time. So being able to do that in the cloud, being able to do that in a way that will scale up automatically, and you can write all of that data together at the same time and create continuous learning systems that will actually improve your systems over time based on automation that you can build into the platform is going to be super critical. So I think the most important thing is do not throw any data away. A lot of times people think, oh, we'll never use that, just let it go, it'll be fine. It's just generated by some stupid machine, we're not going to need it. Generally, I would say log everything that you think you might ever need, and then call the data later on if you're not going to need it. So make sure that you're continuously monitoring that data and trying to build new models based on that data coming in.
I would say you would, to Joel's point, that the data that you're manually generating typically is through some form of mechanical Turk, right? Someone's identifying or labeling data. You want to automate the data labeling as much as possible. So as you're doing data ingest, if you have a 75% or higher certainty, okay, cool, this is going to be labeled this way, and then we can go through a checksum process and validate that label's correct. I mean, the rest of that data is going to probably come through, and you're going to have to manually go through and say, yes, that is a drone. Yes, that is a tank. Okay, this is the type of tank it is. And you're going to enter the metadata label that's going to go into it. You don't throw data away, but you have to have a couple different pools as you're going through the data lake process, right? Lakes have little segments and offshoots. You're going to have those segments as pre-rationalized data. You're going to then rationalize data, run through ETL processes, run through data labeling processes, and then you'll have a rationalized pool. That trained data is what you're going to use your machine learning models against, and then you're going to retrain as you add additional cues. There's going to be structured and unstructured data that you bring in. It's going to depend on what your data sources are. You're going to want to tap additional data sources, so that's where the standardized APIs and bringing your data to one place makes sense. You want to do it across fabrics, which is where you want to be able to go from low side to high side to JWICs, right? You want to have that capability to migrate and retrain on those higher level data sets. But you have to, first and foremost, understand how that data comes in, how you label it, and then how you track that label and have the standardization with the tracking.
Yeah, the other piece of that is having that environment to do this in, right? So this is not, a lot of this stuff is not going to happen on the production network. For as much as ORSAs and some data scientists would love to do all of this on real-time production, how many people in industry do this in real-time production, really? Right, most folks got their own data science environment, right? Their own kind of separate ecosystem to really work this out. So kind of building that out is going to be a huge piece to this. I'll say one more thing on that. All of a sudden, folks that start working in this space realize that all this telemetry data that we've ignored forever, it's probably the most important data you've got, right? Whether it comes to BDP will be an interesting example for me where I want to see how users are using it. Why? Because I want to see the questions they're asking so I can get out in front of requirements. That's something that's really odd in DoD. Well, what do you mean? You're not going to wait for a requirements document? No. I'm going to look at the activity on my real platform, and then I'm going to make a good assessment of what folks are asking and what they're doing, and I'm going to build capability on top of that. That's kind of a crazy idea, but that starts getting to how our TTPs need to change and how we have to rework our policy to support that. The other piece to this on the data side and on the machine learning is we do got to think scale and the questions and problems we're trying to solve. And I think that's going to take a little bit of time as we start building out these platforms and bringing these capabilities in. Is what does make sense to go to the cloud, right? Where do we just take data and cold storage it and be done with it, right? And maybe one day when there's some user activity monitoring issue or there's an insider threat issue, we come back to it. I think that's something that we got to think through. I know companies do it very different in the commercial space, depending on the problems that they're trying to answer. That's going to be kind of the next piece for the Army is, hey, what do the rules for that look like, right? So what are we going to keep in cold storage? What are we going to keep real? How long do we want to keep it? I think those are things that we're going to learn over the next couple of years as we operationalize these capabilities.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add is, we talk a lot about buzzwords like machine learning and AI. And I think that a lot of times we're told or tried to be sold things like, well, you can do that modeling, you can build that modeling on the edge. And I don't really believe that, right? You're not going to build an AI or a machine learning model that's scalable across the enterprise with a half a terabyte, right? So bringing the data to a place like we have, where we have 7+ petabytes, is where we want to do that, where we want to develop those models. And this is where the standardization comes in. So we're prototyping what we're calling the lower echelon analytical platform, which is nothing more than the same open source technologies that we use in our BDP that can be installed at echelon down all the way to the brigade level. So what that does is it allows the BDP that we have, the bigger Gabriel Nimbus, to be the brain. And that's where we go to train, build and develop and train our models. And then with that standardization, I can go ahead and push those models out to the edge, and I can get back the results of those models and validate my model and make it better, right? And that through that standardization and being able to push that all the way down, I'm able to do that. In an environment that was 3 years ago, that would have never, ever been possible. And that's critical, I think.
In the final 5 minutes we have, what I'd ask is, by way of closing remarks, but also addressing a question, give any closing remarks and address how your thoughts on how to address veracity of information. So it's one thing to have it all stored and accessible. How do we assure we've got it trusted? So I'll start with Joel, and we'll end up this way. But if you can address veracity and any closing comment you have. Thank you.
Can you be a little more specific there? I just want to make sure I get the question right.
Just addressing the veracity of the data that is in a data lake or is accessible.
Define veracity, though, because I just want to make sure that...
Accuracy.
Oh, okay. So from a accuracy standpoint, in a data lake, I think you need to be very thoughtful about who's accessing the data and how it's being used. It's very easy to log a whole bunch of stuff and have it be wrong. I would say, though, that as long as you have good access of the data from a large set of individuals and you have a lot of people actually looking at the data and verifying the data, you can you can know when there's issues. Now, your machines can also tell you when there's issues. So what we like to do is we like to see the data flowing through all the time, and when we see anomalies, we like to be able to flag those anomalies automatically and be able to throw automatic flags. Now, sometimes we can fix that data automatically when we see anomalies. Sometimes it requires a human to go and look and see what's going on. So I think the most important thing is automate absolutely everything that you can and automatically self-heal wherever you can. Wherever you can't self-heal, make sure that you have a really good process that allows you to go back and manually look and see how you need to update the data based on that continuous loop. In terms of closing remarks, I would just say, don't be shy. Like, reach out to industry. We are here to help, right? And it doesn't mean that we're here to make a buck. It doesn't mean that we're here to sell you a whole bunch of stuff. I went and served in the government because I really cared about our country and actually doing good things. And I would tell you, AWS, Microsoft, Google, all of us, we want to make a difference for our country and for the broader world. So the more that you can engage with us and we can help you on that journey, the better off we're all going to be.
So I'm going to tell a story. It's going to be quick, though. So how many of you have access to your data centers and your storage arrays today? A couple people in the room? Okay. So how many of you have been on a data center tour within the DoD, like gone and seen a data center? That's a lot more hands. How many of you have been to an AWS or Google data center? To the data center itself? Nice. All right. So I'm sure it wasn't an AWS data center because we don't give tours. We actually don't even mark our facilities, right? What we do is we completely separate the duties from who has access to physical locations and who has access to logical data sets. Why does any of that matter to you when we're talking about data veracity? Well, when we are concerned with data accuracy, it matters how much access you have to an environment. I used to go into bases wearing a Papa John's jacket and had a little placard on my car, and I would get into a data center within about 15 minutes of arriving on base. I would walk in with a USB stick and could basically own a server within a couple minutes. The problem here is, right, that this is easily possible with physical data centers because, one, if you're a data owner, you probably don't have physical access to your data set, but you also don't have any logical access to how the network flow works or any of the logging of that data. Within cloud, you're given the most visibility that you'll ever have within an IT environment. You're going to see every data flow, every bit, every byte, every packet that flows across that environment. And you're going to log all of that data because guess what? That's data that we want to look at. We're going to evaluate and run analytics on that data. We're going to be able to self-heal within that environment. We're going to be able to self-remediate within that environment. Those are things that cloud brings to you. That's how we handle data veracity. And when we're bringing all of this technology to bear, that's the advantage that you get with cloud, is pushing it forward because we're iterating. We've launched over 1,600 new services this year alone, and we're going to announce probably a couple hundred more in November. So if you imagine that pace of innovation is 4x what it was from the previous year, it's 10x what it was 3 years ago, that's the value you're going to get from moving to a cloud service provider. That's the value you're going to get from looking at how these data sets evolve and how you can evolve with that organization so that the DoD isn't 10 years behind the DoD cycle or the IT cycle. You're going to be caught up quickly. It's the fastest way to gain advantage.
So I'll say one thing on veracity because this will scare folks. Not all technology is created equal, right? So I think that's one of the bigger challenges we have in DoD, right, is we're going to have this one thing and it's going to solve all our data problems. It's going to answer any data set we have. That's technically not real. So let's just start there. And that's something that we have to work on, I think, not only as an Army, but as DoD. So I would start off with on that people process technology piece is a very basic understanding across the government and in industry that not all technology is created equal. How you use video versus how you use text is fundamentally different. How you want to store that should be fundamentally different. If you want to access it efficiently, how you do ETL on it is very different. And that has to be part of this conversation, that it's not going to be one platform that's going to answer everybody's questions. And honestly, anyone who says that is just being technically inaccurate. That's just not a real thing. And I think on the process and people piece, and it really does get back to kind of the meta tagging piece. And the other one on the policy part is kind of rethinking how we manage some of that data. When we start looking at larger Army efforts in the cross-functional teams, there's something like the multi-partner environment, MPE. We have to start thinking about these software tools that allow us to protect that data and share it. But all of a sudden, we've created this new monster on the side, which is a way of managing the policy of that data, right? Who can share with whom, who cannot share with whom, even though you're on the same network. Wow, because we can't just build 52 networks on the battlefield because we have 52 partners. That's not real, right? But working through that's like almost creating a whole new MLS, right? Somebody who's sitting there thinking at a policy server, watching those data flows go through and managing that. And that's something to think about, right? I tell folks all the time, and I love the veracity question because it gets into some of the technical challenges we have. But what we've called traditional IT, we just keep moving up the stack, right? We're not in this place anymore where we really care about network switches and care about server rooms. I know we're still there in a lot of places, but as we transition to kind of a lot of these emerging technologies, we're just not going to be worried about that anymore. That really is cattle. It really doesn't matter, right? It's self-healing. It does it. That's the plumbing. You don't worry about the sewer pipe in front of your house, right? You worry about inside your house. And put a new toilet in maybe, and that's as far as it goes. But I think that's kind of where that is. So what does that really mean for our people? And what does that really mean for the kind of training we need to do? Because moving up the stack, it's a little bit more of a sophisticated space than we've been used to, right? And that skill set needs to be a lot more in depth and very different than where we're sitting right now. But I think it's a good time. I'm excited. There's a great technology out there. There's a lot of awesome stuff to do. I think folks are moving across the board all throughout the Army and in DoD to really move the ball down the field. Now it's just a matter of not being scared of doing Pathfinders and just moving out.
So we're over on time, so I'll keep my comments short, but data veracity, 3+ years, 275 nodes, 7 petabytes of data, over 500 data sources, 800+ users. I think we've dealt with it to a large degree in our cyber. And I'd say probably the biggest critical thing that has enabled us to deal with veracity is just the interaction of both automating what you can and having the human in the loop so that you can deal with whatever is coming at you, structured, unstructured, what have you. But having the smart folks there at ingest to deal with whatever's being thrown at you from the network or whatever business area you're in with respect to your data is critical. And then automating everything that you possibly can once you've applied the smarts and getting the data in the right place and in the right format that you want it in. You leverage the automation, the cyber automation. I think that's how we've dealt with it. So I'll end there.
Well, we thank you for your questions and the dialogue. We thank AUSA for the gracious hosting, and we thank General Crawford and General Fogarty for your leadership of the forum. So thanks very much. We look forward to continuing our dialogue about data. Thanks.